Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Graceful Ghost by Eleanor Dixon, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Grace and Rodney sat on a branch in the middle of a pear tree, swinging their legs and throwing half-formed pears toward the lake. A gust of wind made the branch dip alarmingly, but they just laughed. Birds sang in the surrounding trees and took no notice of them. "Look out, there's more," Rodney declared, shading his eyes as he pointed down the long gravel drive. Several cars were turning in through the ornate gates and approaching the entrance to Amberwood Ballet School for Girls. "What do you think, then, your Grace?" Grace parted the branches of the tree and leaned forward. There were so many cars there'd soon be no room to park. "Well," prompted Rodney, pushing his brown serge cap out of his eyes and wiping his hands on his trousers. He didn't care if he made them any dirtier. The frayed edges were already farther away from his ankles than they should have been. And his shirt? Well, that had once been white, but now almost matched his bare feet for dust and grime. "See anything you like? That blue mark over there is pretty smart. It even matches your frock." Grace rolled her eyes at the stable boy. "I'm not interested in the cars," she said. "I'm only interested in the passengers." She watched eagerly as two girls followed the sign that said, "Auditions this way," and collected their candidate numbers from a senior student who was holding a clipboard. "Go through the main door," said the student, pointing, "and follow the corridor to your left. That'll take you to the changing rooms. You'll hear the noise anyway." She laughed and turned to the next would-be ballerina in the queue. The girls sped away, chattering excitedly. "And?" Rodney threw another pear. "I don't know," Grace grumbled. "How am I supposed to tell who needs help making their dream come true? Who will they be wearing a sign around their neck? And how will I know what their dream is? I wish you'd got a bit more information about how this works." Rodney scratched his head and screwed up his face. "Look, it might not work, right? Lord Chisholm's ghost was awful vague. But he got free of that drafty old castle, didn't he? He can go anywhere he wants now, like you." Rodney pursed his lips. "I don't know, sounds too easy to me. But anyway, you're always telling me Amberwood is the best ballet school in the country. So it must be the lifelong desire of all of these girls to get a place. Just choose anyone and make it happen for them." He hitched his trousers. "Though I don't know why you want to bother. Why don't you just enjoy being here?" "That's easy for you to say," Grace retorted as she scrutinized yet more girls spilling out of cars and seeking directions. "You can go anywhere you want, but I've been at Amberwood forever." She turned to Rodney. "I don't want to leave exactly, just be free to come and go. I so want to visit a real theater and see all the famous ballets live instead of on these silly televisions. I want to feel the glamour and the hard work. I want to be a ballerina." "But you can be a ballerina here," Rodney insisted. "We all can. Just watch me do one of those pirouette thingamajiggeries that you do, where you turn around on the spot on one leg." And he threw himself off the branch, thrusting stiff arms above his head. As he sped toward the ground, he turned in the air with one bony foot tucked under his knee and the other pointing downwards. Grace's ringlets danced in time with her giggles. She peered through the leaves while Rodney, having landed, pretended to stumble and fall. Then he picked himself up and made a show of dusting himself off. Grace was about to call down to him when he still had a lot to learn when the sight of an old car, traveling much faster than it should have been in school grounds, made the words catch in her throat. Grace stared at it in dismay. It was headed straight for the pear tree. Chapter 2. "Rodney, look out!" Grace shouted while the pear tree shimmered. As she floated to the ground beside him, the entire tree disintegrated. Grace and Rodney stood and let the car pass through their ghostly forms, making Rodney whoop with delight as its engine stalled a few seconds later. Grace started to shimmer and glow. She twirled like a tornado before coming to a stop in front of Rodney with the biggest grin on her face. "What's up?" he asked. "Shh," said Grace, though she knew no one could see or hear them. She dragged him behind some actual trees that lined the driveway. "I think I've seen her," she exclaimed, her voice rising a notch in excitement. "In that red car that went through us, something felt quite different about it. Do you think that's a sign? Come on," she cried, grabbing his hand. "Let's watch the audition." No, thank you, said Rodney, snatching his hand away. I'm off to Epsom to watch some racing. I'll make the fillies their dance. It tickles me to hear them jockeys say something spooked her. Grace rolled her eyes. Come on, Roddy. Don't you want to see what happens? After all, if it wasn't for you, I may never have found the solution to freeing myself from Amberwood. She wanted her friend by her side. He knew it was her death-long dream, and heaven knows her death had been long. Please. Rodney's eyes shifted. You know all that ballet lark bores me. Grace sighed and gave in. Well, I suppose I can't blame you for wanting a day out. You're so lucky you weren't born and buried here, and that you didn't have a mama who wouldn't let you go. At least you had a mama, grinned Rodney, regaining his enthusiasm. He doffed his cap to her and started to fade. Don't go touring without me, he called. I'll be back before tea. And he disappeared. Grace glided toward the house, then sped down corridors she had once walked along as a living child. She thought it was quite cool that photographs of famous ballet dancers and school shows had replaced the portraits of her ancestors. They'd become so boring. The floors, once carpeted, were now bare stone to withstand the wear and tear of many feet. Grace loved taking the long way to her destination instead of just appearing instantly. Where was the fun in that? To be part of the busy atmosphere of the school, Grace needed to run along the corridors with the young dancers as they juggled books and ballet shoes between classes. There was none of that today, though. The corridors were quiet as auditions were held during the half-term break. Instead of going straight to the studio where the audition would be held, Grace decided to head for the changing rooms to find that special girl. She almost wished she hadn't as she melted through the closed doors. About 30 girls aged between 11 and 14 were chattering and shouting all at once. Where are my hairpins? I'm too fat. I'm too thin. I've lost my leg warmers. Pass the hairspray. Has anyone got a spare hairnet? 2 girls competed in sliding their legs up the wall in splits. They'll never choose me, sighed one. I'm much too tall. It's all right for you. I'm too short, her companion complained. Grace had heard it all before. Every year, in fact. She stared round at the groups of students as they boasted about competition certificates and exam results. Rodney was right. Any one of them might consider it their dream come true to be accepted at Amberwood, especially to win the scholarship. But Grace hadn't felt any particular spark as they arrived. Until that one. There she was, standing apart at the far side of the room. Grace decided she must be about 12, like herself, if you didn't count the 2 centuries she'd been a ghost. And unlike Grace's blonde hair, this girl had shining chestnut hair scraped into a neat bun. She was slight, and her hazel eyes, serious and troubled, gazed at the chaos around her. Then she raised a hand as the senior student with the clipboard yelled above the din, Lauren Mason? That's me, Lauren called, timidly. Here, said the student, approaching and handing Lauren 2 patches of fabric with a number and her name on. I must have missed you outside. Pin one of these onto your front and the other to your back. Lauren's mum, who looked rather pale and strained herself, stepped up to help, murmuring, Don't you think you should warm up, babe? Lauren nodded. There was a vacant wobble board for practicing balance next to her, but she ignored it. She didn't seem interested in the balls and bands provided for the students' use either, but instead moved to a space and lowered herself to the floor where she pointed and flexed her toes. Grace watched in delight. Oh, she was perfect. The arches of her feet were high and strong. Her delicate arms and hands had such poise. Grace floated nearer, causing one girl to shiver and exclaim dramatically, Oh, someone walked over my grave. Grace rolled her eyes. As Lauren bent and stretched, opened her knees so they lay flat on the floor and pulled her legs up over her head, Grace couldn't stop watching her. Look how loose she is, she thought, and how lyrical her arms are. Grace's confidence in her choice began to seep away like air out of a badly tied balloon. I was wrong, she thought. If this girl's dream is to get a place at Amberwood, she doesn't need me to help her. She's a beautiful dancer. She'll get one of the 3 places open to second years, no problem, and might even win the scholarship. Disappointed, Grace looked at the other girls. She would just have to watch the audition and choose one of them instead. A few of them looked as if they needed it, she thought wryly, but she didn't feel as if they deserved it. There was something different about Lauren. Grace melted through the wall into the ballroom studio. It was the largest studio in the school, and so called because when Grace's family had owned Amberwood, it had been the ballroom. Now it had double rows of bars fixed all around the cream-colored walls, and the once polished floor had grown dull from the amount of resin used by the students to prevent their shoes from slipping. Modern lighting shone between the old chandeliers, and the minstrel's gallery was only used for storage. A row of portable bars lined the center of the room for the audition. Grace glanced over at the judges' table. They were settling in their chairs. She liked Mrs. Harriet, the headmistress, who was fair but strict enough to make even Grace shiver. 4 other teachers were judging alongside her. Miss Radcliffe was taking the class, and she stood by the piano in discussion with the pianist. Grace grinned with delight. Everyone adored Miss Radcliffe because she made classes truly inspiring and often treated the girls and Grace herself to stories of the days when she had been a professional ballerina. Grace floated around the room, impatient for it all to start. At least Miss Radcliffe changed into her teaching shoes, checked her short hair in the mirror, and turned to the judges. "We're almost ready," she said. "I'll just open a few windows. It'll get hot with so many students." Mrs. Harriet nodded and picked up the little bell on the table in front of her. She waited, the bell poised, while Miss Radcliffe opened the windows. Then she rang it to call the candidates into the room. Grace felt the tension in the air as the door opened and the head girl ushered in the 30 candidates. Their chatter stopped as suddenly as if someone had pressed the mute button. Grace's interest reignited. Time for her yearly game of guessing who would be chosen and who wouldn't. Auditions were always fun, and this one was special. It was the last time it would be exclusively for girls. Next year, Amberwood would be mixed. Everyone was very excited about that. Looking paler and more nervous than they had in the dressing room, the girls followed Miss Radcliffe's instructions as to where to put their point shoes. Then the head girl helped the teacher arrange them at the bar in numerical order. Miss Radcliffe set the first exercise. Grace settled on the corner of the piano to get a good view while the pianist shivered and wrapped a blanket around her knees, glaring at the open windows. "Mark the exercise first, please," instructed Miss Radcliffe. "I'm sure you all know what it means to mark, but who wants to explain it?" Every hand went up. The teacher nodded to a girl near the front. "We practice the steps in our own time, not doing them properly, just getting them into our heads first, like a pencil sketch by an artist before he starts the actual oil painting." "That's a great way to describe it," approved Miss Radcliffe. "Off you all go. I'll give you 2 minutes." As they all started marking, either in their heads or with their hands or feet, Grace looked for the lovely Lauren. Where was she? She should stand out like a beacon. There, but no. That stunning girl who had looked like she would sail through the auditions like a swan on a lake was standing by the bar with her shoulders hunched. Her mouth was drooping, and her beautiful arms and long legs had become jutting elbows and knobbling knees. She looked awkward and sullen instead of elegant and poised. What had happened to her in the time it took to walk from the dressing room to studio? Grace was appalled as Lauren progressed through the bar exercises, looking worse and worse with each minute. Lauren got most of the exercises wrong. Forgetting the sequence or missing the beat, she extended her leg to the front when the surrounding girls had their legs to the back, so that everyone got tangled up. And she didn't seem capable of keeping up in some faster exercises. Grace didn't understand it. She'd watched Lauren warming up and had seen what she was leagues above these other girls. Why was she now dancing as if she was made of wood and rusty metal? Grace rested her elbow on her knee, her chin in her hand, and stared at Lauren, mesmerized, but for all the wrong reasons. After half an hour, they removed the portable bars, and the students came into lines. Miss Radcliffe set the port de bras, a dance of the arms in which Lauren should have excelled. But instead of floating through the air, her arms looked like they were trying to put out a fire. Then the girls were separated into groups for pirouettes. Grace peeped through her fingers over her eyes as Lauren settled into her preparatory position like a sack of potatoes. Grace attended every lesson at Amberwood and considered herself an expert. She knew that there was no way Lauren would achieve 1 turn, never mind the requested 2. So it came as no surprise when the unfortunate girl hopped around on a bended knee, hit the girl next to her with arms that were out of control, and ended up on the floor. Grace groaned aloud, causing one of the judges to frown in disapproval at the judge on her left. What was going on? Grace thought. What's making Lauren throw away her chances? Grace floated toward Lauren, intending to hover just behind, but as she did, a barrier of negative thought hit her like a flurry of snow. She's doing it deliberately, Grace realized in alarm. For some unknown reason, Lauren is making herself dance badly, but she's really suffering because of it. I need to get to the bottom of this, but at this rate she'll fail and I'll never know the reason why. I need her to come to Amberwood. Time was running out. Grace flew across the room to peer over the judges' shoulders at their notes. Lauren wasn't going to make it. Only the solo remained, and she would need to get 100% in that to pass the audition. The way she was going, Lauren would be lucky to get 10%. As Lauren stood in the center of the studio to start her solo, bottom and chin sticking out, Grace made a quick decision and glided toward her. She sang into Lauren's ear, making her voice resemble an orchestra playing Giselle. Fighting through the cloud of negative thought that was blocking Lauren's mind was like battling through a forest of brambles. But Grace made Lauren daydream she was on the stage of a grand theater. She made her see tiers of red and gold seats holding a rapt audience. She sent feelings of determination and invincibility to her, and with a huge effort that almost exhausted her, she made Lauren forget whatever it was that was troubling her. Grace linked herself as closely as she dared, and when the cue came, the young girl rose to her toes and danced as if she was made of fresh air. Instead of single turns or pirouettes, Lauren did triples. She stood on the toes of one foot, the other stretched out behind her in what ballet dancers called an arabesque, without even teetering. She did the splits in midair as she ran and leapt higher and further than anyone else. Her arms were soft and her expression a perfect mix of gentle and animated. As the music built to a climax, she flew across the studio and landed in her final position, like a snowflake on a rose. For about 10 seconds there was an awed silence. Then everyone in the hall, candidates and adjudicators alike, burst into wall-shattering applause.